Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 30th of September 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by Vanessa Beeley. But first.
Well, on Friday, Brian, we were talking about Boris's gambit, preloading any possibility of sending a letter to the EU asking for an extension of Article 50 by basically going around a lot of them at the UN General Assembly and saying, please don't do that. So we have an idea what Boris has been up to. Well, perhaps we get an idea from the Daily Record now what the other side has been up to, what they're intending, what their gambit is going to be. So this is Daily Record, Scottish newspaper. Brexit fiasco twist as secret plan to make Speaker John Bercow Prime Minister revealed. And what they're saying is that the Speaker of the House has emerged as a shock candidate to take over in number 10 if Boris Johnson's crisis-hit government falls. Politicians of all colours were last night desperately trying to work out a way to topple Boris Johnson and thwart a no-deal Brexit. SNP chiefs said they would support Labour's Jeremy Corbyn as an interim Prime Minister following a vote of no confidence. But senior figures in the Liberal Democrats won't back Corbyn, a position Scottish leader Willie Rennie amplified in an exclusive interview with the Sunday Mail, they report. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Brian, but it definitely looks like they're dragging the bottom of the barrel on the other side of this argument to try to find some way to scupper Boris with his attempts to get Brexit through.
Yeah, well, best summed up by the fact that many people simply did not believe that this story was true. We had some hints a little bit earlier than the Daily Record, but the Daily Record pushed that out and it's now been followed by the papers. So we're seeing it is true. Mr. Bercow, well, what a reputation. So quite a lot of publicity thanks to Mrs. Bercow at one stage, but he's a secular humanist, so that gives him one tick in the box for me. Comes from a Lambeth, I think, Lambeth councillor, one of the inner London councils that's been highly, full of political intrigue over the years. But apparently he's got a social conscience and he's involved with lots of charities. I think he's equivalent to Boris Johnson. He acts very much the buffoon, but I think he's a very capable and dangerous politician. And that would not be a good thing. So they bring in Bercow. Then we have the government of unity. What has that given us? A dictatorship in post?
Well, look, there are many questions about how this might come about because in that article they say that this would follow a vote of no confidence, which would ensure a general election. But of course, it wouldn't do anything of the kind because what they are attempting to do is to call a vote of no confidence, perhaps, but then head off as a group to the Queen and ask her to permit them to set up a government because Boris is a minority government, so they could claim a coalition majority with Bercow as the interim Prime Minister. In the meantime, ma'am, the country is in crisis. We need you to accept this arrangement and form a government this way rather than calling a general election at this stage.
Yeah, we wouldn't want the general public getting involved.
No, that's right. Yeah. So, you know, there's been quite a bit over the last couple of weeks about Boris bringing the Queen into politics and so on. But if this is their plan, then that takes it even a stage further. And the question is, what would the Queen do under those circumstances? But more importantly, what would the general public do under those circumstances if they try to pursue that and replace the Johnson government with a government of national unity without a general election? Would the British people just take that lying down? I'm not sure under the current climate that they would.
I'll just say one of the comments in our chat box at the moment is this seems to be a deliberate slow motion destruction of faith in Parliament. Yes. And I think that's exactly what it is. This is orchestrated, it's politics, it's theatre, it's pantomime being driven. And I'm sure this is what it is, a slow motion destruction while another force takes control of the country. This would be David Scott's government of occupation that he talks about.
Absolutely. Now, the Express didn't go as far as saying that Bercow would replace Boris in number 10, but they're saying that, well, their headline is Remainers plotting new law to allow Bercow to take the place of Prime Minister. And they're saying that MPs are plotting to introduce a new law which would enable Mr Bercow to bypass the Prime Minister and go straight to Brussels on behalf of the House of Commons to prevent a no-deal Brexit. The politicians want Parliament to sit on Saturday, October the 19th, to pass a bill, and that's according to the Mail on Sunday. A senior Commons source said the rebels say that if Boris wants to play with nuclear weapons, then so will they. So the Express reporting that MPs are also drawing up plans to use this new law to give Bercow the authority to choose a new British commissioner to the EU, because of course Ursula von der Leyen said that although Britain has not yet provided a commissioner to the European Commission, if Britain is still in the EU past October the 31st, then there would be a requirement for Britain to provide a commissioner, because effectively under those circumstances the European Commission itself would not be a legal lawful body. So quite amazingly interesting developments there, but it gets better because of course there's all kinds of talk about language at the moment. We were talking a little bit about this on Friday as well. This is The Guardian. Abuse is virtually constant. Female MPs speak about the threats they face. So that's the main MP that they focus on here is Paula Sheriff, who's Labour MP for Dewsbury. I've had too many threats to detail. Well, I'm going to have to say to Ms. Sheriff that I think she does need to detail them. She needs to detail every single threat that she has received, and she needs to demonstrate that those threats actually happened, because it's not sufficient to say that I've had too many threats to detail. Threats on her life, she says, rape threats. Where are these threats? Have they been reported to the police? What have the police done about them? Has there been any action taken? We need to know, because otherwise this is just political posturing. And I think perhaps there's a little bit of concern amongst some of these people that if they press ahead with this idea of a government of national unity against the wishes of the people, that in fact they are putting themselves in a bit of physical danger.
Perhaps the real thing here, Mike, is that they're now starting to feel what people really think, and they're coming out of their Westminster environment, their protected Westminster environment. They're having to face ordinary people speaking as ordinary people do. Sometimes they can be quite rude and aggressive. We all have to put up with that, but these rather delicate MPs have to make a big issue out of it. But yeah, she should absolutely specify what she's talking about.
Absolutely. In the meantime, a bit of focus on Dominic Cummings again, because he's being criticised for using the term surrender, and he apparently announced at a meeting on Friday, the Brexit Party meeting on Friday, the term surrender will be used repeatedly during the general election. We'll shove it down their throats, was what he's quoted as having said. So it's all promoting this idea of extremist behaviour from certain sections of the community. Well, in the meantime, then quite a bit has happened over the last 24 hours following a video that Simon Bean, MBE, has pushed out. Now, Simon Bean, a former non-commissioned officer in the British Army, has pushed out a video yesterday, which just went viral with respect to Defence Union, and the fact that, of course, if Defence Union isn't made an issue by the 1st of November, which is actually being openly discussed, then we're in real trouble at that point. Now that video went viral. He made a couple of errors in the video with respect to some detail of letters with respect to Admiral Roger Lane Nott and so on. He didn't mean to say the word letter, he meant to say details, and he pushed out a further corrective video this morning. Now I want to just show a little bit of that, because this is the key point.
We need to know this. Who has made these commitments and assurances? What are they? Regardless of the result of Brexit. Alan Duncan and Earl Howe have attended a meeting at the EU. We need to know what has been said or has gone on at that meeting that we're not aware of. Since I put the feed out yesterday, things have gone absolutely bonkers. This is a call out to all veterans and all people of the United Kingdom. I implore you at this time, keep your powder dry. Our reaction must be one of non-violence. Formal dialogue must be opened with Boris Johnson and Ben Wallace, Secretary of State for Defence, to openly state, are we in or are we out of EU defence unification? As Lord James stated, we must know the truth.
I think it'd be pretty hard to put that any better.
I think it was utterly brilliant, Mike. And of course, what this man's doing as a former NCO is addressing not only the veterans, but he's addressing the public with the facts as to what's going on. The country is being sold out from under us by EU Defence Union. We are still only seeing a couple of senior British military officers, retired officers, who have the courage to stand up and speak out, usually within a fairly protected environment. They might be speaking in Russia or they might be in some other meeting environment. What we're not seeing is retired senior British military officers speaking out and talking to the nation as this man is. Now, he's got a lot of supporters, which is why this is of immense interest. But I just find it fascinating that we're now at the stage where the country's literally back against the wall as we face the selling out of our military and security services, intelligence services to Europe, and it takes an NCO to speak out. We are still seeing utter ignorance, arrogance from these retired senior officers, many of whom seem to be too scared to actually stand up and speak out because some politician might tell them off for being a naughty boy. I'm afraid, Mike, we've got to the point where we need to call these people out. And what this man has done is put them all to shame, I think.
Yes, and one of the things that has got people going is that Simon focused absolutely on the 1st of November and what happens after that, and the point that, you know, no matter the type of Brexit that we have, commitments have been made to the EU with respect to Britain's involvement in defence union. And so he is saying quite clearly to everybody that this has to be made an issue of the debate between now and the 1st of November, because at the moment it doesn't have widespread public understanding. It has to be made an issue, and he's really calling on people to turn this into a major Brexit issue for the next 4 weeks. And we, as he says, we need a comment, a clear comment from Boris Johnson about what Britain's status will be should he succeed in achieving some kind of Brexit on October the 31st. What will Britain's status be in EU Defence Union following that?
And what was discussed in these secretive meetings. We know the meetings took place. It's pretty obvious what was discussed, but where are the minutes and when will those minutes be shown to the general public? So this man is spot on. You can find this video. It's on YouTube as well as Facebook. If you just put in Simon Bean, you will find it very quickly.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other things we mentioned last week as well with respect to this was the similarity in what's going on in the UK and what's going on with Boris Johnson and in the United States with Donald Trump. This is The Hill, which is a Washington-based publication. Why trying to impeach Trump and oust Johnson may end in tears. And it's by two guys who work at the Atlantic Council, Matthew Burrows and Julian Mueller-Keller. They are both part of the Atlantic Council's Foresight Strategy and Risks Initiative. They're saying that despite the fact they like neither Trump nor Boris Johnson, but to win the argument and strip Trump of his powers, Democrats will have to do more than pass impeachment legislation. Their strategy is a dangerous all-or-nothing approach that may well end in tears. If removing the president from his office fails, Democrats will hand Trump even more ammunition to establish his outsider narrative and inflame his populist base. What is true in the United States also applies to Britain. Many celebrated the paralysis of Johnson's government as the country's Supreme Court made history earlier this week, but polling shows that the decision might prove to be a Pyrrhic victory given the outrage that it has caused amongst hardcore Brexiteers and Johnson's exploitation of the populist narrative. And so it goes on. So you see the position they're coming from, but there is a recognition from them that this is potentially disastrous for the Remain side. They say at some point the establishment needs to take responsibility for their past failures and draw respective lessons from them. Populist supporters are neither Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables nor an exclusive club of homophobic racists. They are rather disillusioned victims of economic disruptions and are beyond their control. If mainstream politicians are to combat the disease of populism, they need to take away the reasons for public frustration and widespread disappointment. So they push that old narrative once again, the disease of populism and so on. But, you know, Theresa May expressed very similar views at several times while she was Prime Minister. I don't think that really it comes down to people's unhappiness with austerity. This is something much bigger than that.
Much bigger. What I'd like to do is just jump back a bit. We're going back to 2007, 2018. We're back on the subject of the European Union. And of course, this country, the United Kingdom, has been in trouble ever since it's got involved with the European Union. And that's led us to this present chaos. So here's the headline. Sun peers in EU pocket. Brexit bashing Lords receive 500,000 in EU pensions a year and aren't allowed to criticise Brussels, but won't say so in Brexit debate. So the Sun picking up something pretty interesting. And of course, people were challenging the Supreme Court judges on this issue, that if they've been involved with the European Union, were they bound to keep silent on EU issues? That would have meant their decision totally biased. This is some of the detail. The EU forking out over 500,000 a year in pensions to 30 former MEPs and officials. These are some of the ones they focused on. It says 7 ex-European commissioners swore an oath of loyalty to Brussels that means they risk losing the pension if they attack their old institutions. Lord Kinnock's on the biggest gravy train, £87,000 a year. I imagine if that's coming in on a monthly, let alone an annual basis, you're going to be very careful what you say about the EU. We've got Lord Patten here on 3,800. Tugendhat, Commissioner 1977 to 81, estimated pension of 41,000, and former Trade Commissioner Lord Mandelson due to receive a pension of 34,600. So the warnings were all there about that. Decided to focus on Lord Kinnock. And if we jump back a bit, we can remember the story that started to emerge, which was to do with fraud inside the European Union itself. So this article is back in 2003. Kinnock in the firing line of investigation into Brussels fraud claims, and they were talking about up to £638,000 of cash generated by Eurostat was funneled into unofficial slush funds, and that provided the most serious scandal. But in fact, this was only the tip of the iceberg, and Lord Kinnock was in the commission there, and eventually the pressure was such that the European Union had to admit it. And in fact, they all resigned at one particular point. But what we're seeing is the heart of the European Union: corruption, fraud, cover-up. And of course, how did they cover up? Well, this lady, Marta Andreasen, who was chief whistleblower of what was going on here, They waited until it had quietened down a bit, and then she was simply sacked. And as this article says, well, really, she was sacked on Lord Kinnock's watch. So the European Union, vast amounts of money in order to do its business. And I just picked this up. This is a recent advert for the European Union. It's talking about funding Horizon 2020. And the boast is here that there's £80 billion worth of funding available. And this is absolutely how the EU buried its way into the UK. It bought government officials, it bought local authorities, drooling to get their hands on EU grant money. And of course, that money was handed out with very few checks and balances so that the corruption could grow. And of course, what has they done with the money? Well, this is going back again to 2008, but you get the idea. Europe's hidden hand, EU funding for political NGOs in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Encourage people to go and have a look at some of the detail here, because it's warning that the EU is influencing political power by putting in this these slush funds and setting up these NGOs in order to influence what's happening, in that case in the Middle East, but we're also seeing it in Eastern Europe at this time. So dangerous stuff.
Okay, now if you like what the UK Column is doing and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. Various options for joining us there. Your financial support, much appreciated and much needed. A quick reminder, once again, that ENR Crane continues his 5G Is It Safe tour. All these events begin at 7:30 p.m. in the evening. This is the 30th of September, so he's gone through quite a number of these. He's in Hull tonight at the Royal Britannia Hotel, Sheffield tomorrow, Leeds, Manchester and Edinburgh in the rest of the week, and then one more week of it ending up in Cardiff on Friday the 11th of October. Okay, let me welcome Vanessa Beeley to the programme. Hello, Vanessa. Oh, we can't hear you. Are you muted? Still can't hear you. What's going on there?
We see whether we can do a.
Just say something again, Vanessa, please.
Hello.
Aha, right, there we go. Okay. Yes, that's better. Welcome to the programme. Now, we want to highlight an article that we've put up on the UK Column today and discuss this, called White Helmets and HALA Systems, the Grotesque Militarization of Humanitarianism in Syria. Well, you begin by saying the targeting of civilians attempting to flee terrorist-occupied and controlled areas of Syria is a familiar one, reported in East Aleppo and in eastern Ghouta as the SAA, that's the Syrian army, advanced towards final liberation of these districts. And you said the value of these civilians for the terrorists is primarily as human shields, but that it has been reported to you by civilians and medical staff in the region that armed groups are demanding upwards of $500 of an already impoverished civilian population to be allowed to exit via the Russian and Syrian established humanitarian corridors. So that's a pretty gross situation. If people trying to escape a war zone are having to pay in order to get allowed out.
Well, yeah, and I mean, of course, we can't forget that the British government has invested $2.71 billion, and in fact, I believe that statistic is now increased, into so-called humanitarian aid, the majority of which, of course, is going into Idlib, which, according to Brett McGurk, is the largest al-Qaeda haven since 9/11. So one has to immediately question where this so-called humanitarian aid is going, number one, and also why the British government is not highlighting the Syrian government and its allies' efforts to basically allow civilians to leave the area of a military campaign against known and recognized designated terrorist groups inside Idlib. That aside, of course, what we've also seen recently, and what I highlight at the beginning of the article to bring people into this subject, is the fact that Russian warplanes have effectively targeted what they describe as surveillance points or early warning system points manned by terrorist groups inside Idlib that are obviously monitoring the takeoff of Syrian and Russian warplanes and relaying information about their potential target, which of course is the military sites inside Idlib. Not the multiple civilian sites that are being sensationally mentioned and talked about in mainstream media, which of course is aligned to the government project of regime change in Syria. What is very interesting is when I started to look into this operation of Hala Systems, in 2015, August 2015, I actually wrote my very first article about the White Helmets, of course, the UK Foreign Office manufactured so-called first responder unit that is working exclusively in areas controlled predominantly by Al-Qaeda, but also other extremist and sectarian offshoots of Al-Qaeda and ISIS operating in Syria. In August 2015, the White Helmets, through Khaled Khatib, put out a very clear demand for an early warning system, for a radar system that would inform them of incoming flights by Syria and Russia targeting terrorist headquarters and ammunition dumps and so on in the areas occupied by those armed groups. Now, what is very interesting is that Hala Systems was established towards the end of 2015, also shortly after the Russian military intervention, which came in at the end of September 2015. So here we have a very clear timeline for me as to why Hala Systems was created in the first place, in response, one, to the distress call from the White Helmets that are affiliated to Al-Qaeda, then in response also to the Russian military intervention to support its Syrian allies at the invitation of the Syrian government. Of course, Russia is legally intervening inside Syria, unlike the US coalition. So this was my initial delving into Hala Systems, who they are, why they were created, and what exactly they're doing in Syria.
Okay, so you go on in the article to say that in August 2016, 1 year after the appeal launched by the White Helmets and their PR agency that you've just discussed there, a Chicago-based company, Hala Systems, launched Sentry, and they have a nice logo for that. It looks, in shape at least, quite similar to the White Helmets logo. Am I wrong?
Well, no, not at all. In fact, Hala Systems, and here it must be emphasized who Hala Systems is. I can't go into all the details, obviously, because we have limited time. But if people go to the article, what is very clear is this is not a kind of an amateur startup tech company. This is staffed by directors and employees from the absolute blue chip industry, military, industrial complex, from the US military, from the US Navy, from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, various laboratories. So serious experience in military engineering and technical projects. From Deloitte, which is known to be a CI front and a corporate corruption company, from McKinsey, bringing you into globalism, all manner of serious fronts, I believe, for intelligence agencies, particularly with a focus on the United States. When we look at the governments that are funding and supporting Hala Systems, of course, we have Canada, we have Germany, apparently, according to a statement from one of their co-founders. We have the United States through their CIA outreach agent, USAID, which is funding them. And that funding is being managed by one of their employees who has a history of managing USAID contracts globally. We have the UK, of course, directly funding Hala Systems through the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, which is also, of course, financing the White Helmets and Mayday Rescue, the NGO set up by the founder of the White Helmets to basically manage the payments from the British governments to the White Helmets. It has to be emphasized here, the Conflict Stability and Security Fund is a multi-billion or 2 billion slush fund that is contributed to by taxpayer funds. Very important point there. The Netherlands government also behind the funding and support of Hala Systems. So we have all the same governments who are supporting the White Helmets, who are in partnership with Hala Systems, but also the same governments that have been absolutely instrumental and the drivers behind the regime change war and the financing and equipping of the terrorist groups in Syria.
But also on there we have Creative Destruction Lab, we have Singularity University. So there's AI in this as well.
Yeah.
And also the United Nations, it looks like there. So what is this? It must be more than just a tech company that's providing a few cameras.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the article is incredibly detailed, and I apologize for the length, but it was very difficult not to write in great depth on this. Yes, you're absolutely right. There is AI technology involved in this, which brings us into connection with Israel, one of the partners of Hala Systems Consensus, which has created this. I'm not technically very adept at describing this kind of blockchain system whereby the information collated by Hala Systems on the ground in Syria is then fed into this sort of cloud, as far as I can appreciate it. And that data is then being used by organizations like the UN and other international human rights organizations to basically attribute blame for war crimes. But again, what has to be very clear, as with the White Helmets, Hala Systems is very clearly focusing only on the alleged war crimes of the Syrian government and its allies, never on those committed by the terrorist groups, of course, with which they clearly must associate just by the connections they have with the White Helmets and other entities inside Syria. So those war crimes are, of course, being ignored, as they are unilaterally across Western media, Western governmental think tanks and institutions. But I think what is very important here is that Hala Systems is developing not only technology which is clearly offering the White Helmets and by association the terrorist groups an early warning system, but Franz Buess, who's one of the co-founders, although he later joined Hala Systems after its initiation, is a previous engineer at Lockheed Martin. He has extensive experience on drone technology, apparently, according to some of the papers he's written, at MIT. Now, he argued for the use of drones as a potential alternative to plane airdrops, in particular in East Aleppo, to the terrorist groups that were still occupying East Aleppo towards the end of 2016. Now, what is very interesting, and this is a question I'm raising in the article, the Russian military base in Haimamim has come under a huge number of attacks by drones in the last 2 years. I think 118 attacks have been recorded by the Russian military commanders in Haimamim. Now, what is interesting again is in the recently liberated northern Hama region, which borders Idlib, in Latamna, they found a suspected drone factory underground in a terrorist complex, which is underground, which most of them are in Idlib and across Syria. Now, if that is correct, Russian military who I met with also on the borders with Idlib in the last few months told me that they were convinced that American specialists are helping the terrorist groups to develop not only chemical weapon capability, but also other technical military hardware. Now, the sheer experience that Hala Systems has within its ranks, the fact that this drone factory has been discovered on the borders with Idlib, the comments from, or the intelligence from the Russian military raises the question, are Hala Systems offering technical assistance and expertise to the armed groups, possibly via the White Helmets whom they partner and who, of course, are still being portrayed as this first responder unit inside Syria? But it raises that question, and it must surely raise that question at an international level, I would hope so. Are the White Helmets basically a paramilitary agency being power multiplied by Hala Systems with assistance and technical expertise to provide the same to the terrorist groups inside Idlib?
One of the points that you make in the article is that, of course, HALA Systems got started through an early investment from Frank Giustra here, who's on the right, and this, links back potentially to the likes of the Clinton Foundation and so on. How much of this do you think was seed funded by these types of so-called philanthropic organizations and people?
Very much so. If you go to the article, you'll see all the connections. What this actually did, and this is what was surprising for me, I started off as an investigation into this militarization of the White Helmets, but it developed into an expanded investigation, which is linking into work that I'm doing currently with Whitney Webb of Mint Press News, into the human currency of war, the human trafficking. Now, the fact that Frank Giustra, who's a crony capitalist with strong links, of course, to the Clinton Foundation, linked to the financing of the corrupt and fraudulent Haiti Development Fund, involved in the Uranium One scandal, where he profited from his relationship, or he allegedly profited with his relationship with Bill Clinton to secure uranium deals in Kazakhstan. Giustra is a crony capitalist, rubbing shoulders with some of the most elite, powerful globalists in this world today, involved in many of the organizations that are ostensibly, of course, there to prevent conflict, but who are effectively enabling and manufacturing consent for conflicts, particularly for interventionist conflicts like the one we've seen in Syria. Giustra also has connections, and again, that is explored in the article, to a number of NGOs, not only to HALA Systems, but to a number of NGOs that are suspected, or at least in some cases, have actually been prosecuted for their involvement in human trafficking, particularly of refugees in Greece. Now, what this brings me back to another important question to ask about HALA Systems. When I look into some of the technical papers that have been presented by members of HALA Systems, like, for example, Dan Henbury, whose background is definitely in US military, in AI technology. He was, again, another employee of Deloitte. He has presented papers talking about the development of this AI technology to fundamentally track human beings. Now, of course, they don't put it in those terms, but reading between the lines, that's effectively what they're suggesting this technology should be used for. Now, this, of course, connects into the investigations we're doing into the human trafficking rings, particularly in Greece, where we know that there are systems in place to track the refugees coming into Europe from conflict areas such as Libya, Sudan, and of course Syria.
And of course we can't miss the fact that there's always children used to promote this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we also have to bear in mind that the White Helmets stand accused by Syrian civilians of organ trafficking, of human trafficking, and of child abduction. When I interviewed Dr. Zahir Hajar, who's the director of forensics in Damascus, he informed me that he definitely believes that the White Helmets are running these cross-border organ trafficking operations, but he also believes that with the liberation of Idlib, which of course is imminent, further evidence of the White Helmet involvement in these human trafficking rings will become apparent. And of course, we mustn't forget that James Le Mesurier, the UK intelligence manufacturer or creator of the White Helmets in 2013. In 1999, he was stationed in Pristina, Kosovo, working under Bernard Kouchner, who was the UN representative at that time. And while he was basically in charge of the rebranding or the transformation of the Al-Qaeda Albanian warlord Kosovo Liberation Army into the Kosovo Security Corps, so a whitewashing basically of a terrorist organization. They were running the cross-border organ trafficking, human trafficking operations. The majority of victims were Serbs that were being taken from Kosovo across the border into Albania, where their organs were being removed. This is extensively documented particularly by Carla Del Ponte, who wrote about this sort of heinous operation. So what we're seeing here are the connections of the nexus of NGOs, billionaires, military-industrial complex connected organizations running and driving and promoting the white helmets, and a clear attachment to such operations, the harvest of war.
So this is a pretty important article, and I'd like to encourage as many people as possible to share that as we can get. So thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Now, before we move on, or before we go, I want to just mention this. You sent this over to me earlier. This is from Middle East Eye. Exclusive Twitter executive for Middle East is British Army PSYOPs soldier. And they're talking about this guy, Gordon McMillan, who's the head of editorial at EMEA Twitter, for the EMEA in Twitter. And they say that he is ex-British military, that he in fact still serves in 77th Brigade, which is the information warfare unit of the British Army. Now, they say that he admitted that until recently on his LinkedIn profile. I think he had added this information, it was noticed, he was asked about it, was taken down again. It's certainly not on his LinkedIn page at the moment, although he does admit that in his education that he was educated initially at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. We've asked for comment from Ministry of Defence on this for confirmation, but actually, Vanessa, I have no doubt that this article is absolutely correct. The implications of somebody that's currently serving as head of editorial for the Middle East at Twitter is in fact a member of 77th Brigade. That is a pretty significant development, and really says a lot about why it's very hard to get certain narratives traction on Twitter.
Well, what's interesting, you just mentioned Sandhurst, of course, James Lemazurier, who I've just been speaking about, was Sandhurst educated. And I would also, I can't remember, but I would wonder whether Hamish de Bretton Gordon, who of course is the former military so-called chemical weapons expert who's been instrumental in producing the alleged chemical weapon use narrative that is used to criminalize the Syrian government in Syria, is also a former Sandhurst cadet. But yeah, I mean, what you have here is quite appalling. I mean, the article is written by Ian Cobain, who I definitely, rate as a really solid journalist, who's been very much sidelined at The Guardian, or it appears so. Now, what is fascinating here is this means that basically, effectively, Twitter is being used as a propaganda arm for the Ministry of Defence, and of course we know that the Ministry of Defence is not going to undermine its own military engagement in areas like Syria by allowing diverging or challenging views to be aired or given a bigger platform on Twitter. So yes, I mean, we know that without the information war, many of these military wars would not be facilitated. So therefore, here is the Ministry of Defence creating, as they say, an information war unit to push back against the raising of awareness in British public that, of course, threatens the entire war machine globally.
Okay, thank you very much. Any thoughts on that?
Well, Vanessa, very good analysis, and I have read your article. I'm going to read it again because, as you say, there's a lot of information there. Encourage people to do that. I'm just going to say I've got a follow-on, which I'll just show one slide because we're tight for time. Just in a minute, Mike. But
okay.
We'll save that for another day. But fascinating how you're talking about really the suffering coming out of these war zones. We're now starting to see how this is being fed into our own society, and just remarkable where it leads. We'll just put this one on screen, but this is back from 2017, and it was from Breitbart saying politicians call for Wales to be transformed into the world's first migrant sanctuary. This is for Wales as a country to become a migrant sanctuary country. It was tweeted out by a couple of people. Most people saw it and then forgot about it, but actually we know that this is now coming in as an agenda, and it's remarkable that when you follow the people through, we come to the United Nations, and when we follow those United Nations people through, we can actually bring it full circle to people involved in all the sorts of operations that you've just described. So a very, very interesting circular system going, where you create the wars that produces, of course, the devastation and the migrants and the corruption and the fraud and the people trafficking, and then that is brought back to essentially attack the citizens of individual countries. But we'll save that for another day, I think.
Okay.
Well, that brings us to the end of our news. Thank you for joining us, and we'll just say that if you would like to see that Simon Bean video, you can find it on his Twitter page, which is @Bean, BEAN, and of course Simon Bean's a retired warrant officer, awarded the MBE, and we've just got to say how fantastic to see this man standing up and saying what needs to be said when we have hundreds of senior retired British military officers who are doing what? Playing golf, possibly, in the club, drinking the gin and tonic, but too arrogant to stand up and be counted. So we're going to say, well done, Simon. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back at the same time on Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.